Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's Matthew, aka the Historical Gamer, and today is going to be part 4 of my AAR of Fall Weiss, the turn-based strategy or tactical, I'm not quite sure what I'd classify this game as, war game simulating the German invasion of Poland in 1939. When we last left off, I was making some pretty significant progress and had broken through in several key locations and was speeding toward Warsaw, so that's where we're picking up here today. And, you know, as we see here, we're mid-turn already, just kind of obliterating Polish units, or attempting to anyway, seeing if we can figure out, you know, a way to effectively move past the Polish soldiers and advance on Warsaw. Now, last episode I talked a bit about the history of the German invasion of Poland and kind of various battles and campaigns and sort of the underlying history surrounding the conflict, and that doesn't leave a whole lot of room for historical talk here about Poland today. What I think I'm going to focus this video on more is, well, it'll probably be a little bit shorter to begin with than some of the previous ones. I don't think it'll go an hour, maybe a little bit, maybe like 40-50 minutes, somewhere in that range. But I think what I'll focus this video on is just kind of, you know, what I'm doing in the game, and, you know, other than that, I'm not quite sure. We'll see. I'll kind of work through it as I play through it here. So it's mid-turn right now here. I think it's September 9th. It's hard for me quite to tell at the moment. This is going to be one of the first videos, or actually the first videos in the series that isn't live streamed. I've recorded that in advance, and then I'm just kind of talking over it in the aftermath. I wanted to make sure the entire campaign got recorded, so that's what I did in this case. Is I went ahead and I you know, streamed the first several episodes. The first 3 episodes are all streamed, and that was more due to some recording issues I was having. I got those sorted out and didn't really have a moment to stream. I had played ahead kind of when I was having some internet issues and just kind of recorded the game rather than streaming over it. So rather than rambling about this, just kind of long and short of it is, this is pre-recorded gameplay that I'm talking over. Now, one thing that you know, again, it's kind of difficult to pick up, but as you can see, I'm advancing down toward Warsaw. The siege of Warsaw had begun already now, historically. The city had been cut off and surrounded, and it was... so I'm a little bit behind the game on that, but one thing that I don't think I'm going to see is, I really feel the Polish army is in much worse shape at the moment. There's individual blocks of a few troops here, maybe a few troops there, but they really don't lack the cohesion, the strength, or the location to launch a counterattack against me. Most of the units that are isolated are heavily outnumbered. I've got troops to the front, and that's a good example of why playing with Fog of War makes things so much more difficult, or easy for you, difficult to simulate reality. Is because, you know, something like this, I can see where everything was. A key that I talked about last week, a key to the Polish offensive, which occurred, was like from the 9th to the 17th of September, was the Polish 2 largest army groups were actually thought to be defeated in the first couple of days by the Germans, so they were more or less ignored. The remnants were ignored, and they were thought to be scattered. They were not thought to have a solid sense of cohesion. So, you know, from that standpoint, that's something that you'd probably want to play Fog of War on if you wanted to accurately simulate that. And as a result, because I can see where all of the Polish units, I've had a much easier time finding and destroying individual Polish units without losing too much in the way of, you know, bypassing troops without realizing that. That is something, when you play the game with Fog of War on, that you will see a pretty good job of the game modeling, is that ability to kind of race right past a unit, not even realize it's there unless you're really close by, and then that unit can cause trouble later on. One other thing worth mentioning is, since the last time of our video here, Wasteland has announced that they are the #1 vote getter on Steam, which is, you know, obviously exciting for them. it's interesting because I think there's a lot of war games that are coming out now or being worked on now that perhaps are more appealing to mainstream audiences today than maybe they used to be, or at least games are trying to be more mainstream. I don't know if that was a design approach taken with Fall Weiss or not. I'm not really sure about that. But it seems like you're seeing more games that certainly look to be authentic and want to be authentic, and their goal is to reach out and attract people who maybe otherwise wouldn't play war games, but at the same time they're more broad, so you can see these types of games appeal to people other than just the hardcore war gamer. And I think Fall Weiss is a good example of that, because you've got a lot of information that gets included here on kind of the bottom of the screen when you select any given unit. There is an absolutely amazing and huge scale to this game that very few games can compare to, especially in sort of a limited geographic sense, where you've got a battlefield of just the country of Poland, which for war games is somewhat small on this sort of level, on this hex-based level, where it's not just an individual battle. But you also it doesn't feel too large. You've got a good scalable map, and then you've also got a whole bunch of information provided on the bottom of the screen of the game. But that's not critical to playing the game. So I guess I kind of go back and forth on this, because I wonder, will hardcore war gamers feel like this game has enough in it for them? Will casual gamers give it a real chance? But it's interesting because it's been pointed out that Fall Weiss is now the #1 vote getter on Steam. So obviously there's some appeal there to people who are voting on it. And another war game which is in development, Ultimate General. I don't know if I'd classify that as a war game or an RTS. Obviously it hasn't come out yet, so it's hard to really say. But obviously it covers the topic of the Civil War, which is something that war gamers would be interested in. So that game has also been greenlit. So you're seeing more mainstream acceptance of these types of games, perhaps is the way to put it. And it'll be interesting to see how they do, because it's one of those things where they're getting some attention, they're getting some publicity, they're getting some votes. The success of the games is anything but certain, but it seems like war games are perhaps going out of their way to be less restrictive to players who might otherwise not be interested in a hardcore war game experience, but want to play something that has maybe a historical topic or theme to it, or a war theme to it, but they don't want to have to study books for hours and hours on end. So maybe that's a little bit of it. I'm not sure, but this age of specialization that we're in terms of computer gaming is interesting, and I'll leave it at that. I don't want to ramble about that too much, but it's definitely interesting. It's definitely new. And I think technology and digital distribution and all these other things here are maybe allowing it to occur, and it's exciting as someone who watches games. And it seems perhaps that more games will attempt to make that sort of their goal. I know, for example, the Scourge of War team has announced that they're going to attempt to make the next Scourge of War product more appealing to the sort of not average gamer, but maybe someone who's interested in history, but is kind of intimidated by the learning curve of Scourge of War, and make that much more user friendly. So whether it be Scourge of War, Ultimate General, or Fall Weiss, it seems like a lot of games which are still geared toward hardcore gamers are also at the same time coming out and attempting to be more appealing without losing that niche or that element of uniqueness to them. I certainly wouldn't say that Fall Weiss is not a war game. It's a war game in every sense. Maybe it's not as hardcore as a Gary Grisby game, but it's not trying to be, and most war games don't try to be that. So I think that's a good thing. You can think of it kind of like a starter game. Maybe not as much of a starter game as Panzer Corps or Allied Corps were, but a game that maybe takes it a little bit beyond what those games do, and a little bit more in depth, a little bit more immersion, and at the same time, not something that's absolutely so difficult and terrifying to pick up that it would prevent someone who maybe sees the game and decides to go ahead and give it a shot because it looks interesting or because they saw a YouTube video on it or something to that effect. So that element interests me, and that's something I wanted to talk about. But as you can see here, I'm kind of rolling through the Polish lines still, heavily outnumbering them at the point of attack. Virtually no chance for a Polish counterattack. Maybe limited counterattacks, limited to 1 or 2 units, but definitely nothing terribly organized or effective is going to come of that. The Polish are done. This is a victory at this point, almost certainly. At this point, it looks like the Polish have somewhat of a stronger force here in the south. It looks like about 4 regiments of cavalry, an infantry regiment on the very north, and then also an armored regiment, a couple of infantry regiments, an armored regiment, and a headquarter unit. So this is probably one of those groups that the Polish historically launched that counteroffensive with. It's just south of Poland here, just around the Lutz area. I guess historically the main offensive was just north of Lutz, but still. So you see these kind of larger elements of the Polish army, and they're just completely overwhelmed and outnumbered by my own troops, and they're just really stand no chance. It's just a matter of if I want to race to Warsaw kind of by the historical route that the Germans took, or if I want to take my time destroying these units in the Polish military prior to that advance. So I'm kind of trying to do the latter. I'd rather destroy the force first. That'll make taking Warsaw easier and have to negate any risk that a counterattack would cause. Not that they would beat me, because really at this point they're not going to, but more along the lines of any annoyance or threat to my flank or delays that they could cause. I do find it interesting that there are so many turns in this game, considering 1 turn is equal to 1 day. The idea of this war or this offensive or this conflict in Poland going on for over 100 days is kind of foreign to me. Into the winter of '39, I suppose if it had, it could have caused some serious logistics issues, or at the very least, issues with where the Germans were placing their troops. Certainly would have delayed the invasions of Denmark and Norway, the invasion of France, and it really could have turned the war into a whole different scenario. The only way in which I think that 100+ days would be even feasible in this game is if you're playing as the Polish and you're very, very good, and you're not playing against a human opponent as the Germans. But even beyond that, I don't know. There is a reinforcement system which we've seen me play a little bit around, but I don't know how, if you get enough, I guess I haven't done the math on it, if you would get enough reinforcements to support you replacing your losses for that long a period of time. Certainly seems to play out fine in any kind of reasonable length of game as I've seen here, but it doesn't seem, if you're going 4 times the actual historical campaign, I'm not sure if that's something that the game would do well to support. But again, I don't know. That it could. I just haven't ever had a conflict last long enough to try that. And yeah. But anyway. So I actually split the recording of this game, this gameplay or this audio or whatever, into a couple of days. I was recording it over a couple of days, and today actually, yesterday, Fall Weiss was greenlit on Steam. So that's got to be exciting for Wasteland, and it's kind of an interesting thing because it seems like there's been a little bit more in the way of war games that have been showing up on Steam. I guess we'll see if they're successful. It's certainly possible they could do well because obviously they got a lot of votes at the same time. Whether they are successful remains to be seen. So I wish them all the luck, all the luck in the world, and I guess we'll find that out pretty shortly. They also, Wasteland, who develops Fall Weiss, also had another game on their Strategic War in Europe, which was also greenlit. So, as I said, quite a bit more in the way of war games getting greenlit lately. You've got Strategic War in Europe, you've got Fall Weiss, there was a real-time tactical Civil War game, I believe, which was recently greenlit. I believe it was called Civil War Ultimate General Gettysburg, Civil War General Gettysburg Ultimate. Let me look that up because I probably should have had that handy prior to actually talking about it. Okay, it's called Ultimate General Gettysburg. Sorry about that. Which is being made by a modder of Rome Total War, or not Rome Total War, but what was it? Napoleon Total War, I think, is where the modder came from. So that's got to be exciting for you know, fans of real-time tactical games. It just seems like there's more in the way of war games showing up. Granted, you know, I don't think you'll. I suppose someday you could see something like War in the Pacific on there, but I'm not sure how well it would sell. But again, that's a topic for another time. Just wanted to go ahead and mention that the game has been greenlit. I haven't seen any details on if you own it, you know, from Gamersgate or any other publications, whether you can actually, you know, use that copy of the game on Steam. Hopefully you can. A lot of the developers have implemented that, so once you do get on Steam, you can use your keys to play on Steam. I know Out of the Park Baseball did that, and there have been other games as well. So one of them, what was it? Game Dev Tycoon did that as well. Those are just two that I have some personal experience with, so I'm not sure how the rest of it'll play out. But again, it's for these types of developers, it's an interesting time. Although Steam has said that they're going to be axing Greenlight, so I wonder how some of these devs feel with regards to, oh, you got Greenlight, but Greenlight isn't long for this world. Steam does intend to implement a fully self-publishing system, I believe, so it'll be interesting to see how they kind of manage the content on Steam, whether it's going to become more fully open along the lines of like the Google Play Store, or maybe whether it's more, I don't want to say the Apple App Store is highly curated, but it's not as easy to get in the Apple App Store as it is to get into the Google Play Store. So whether it's going to be more, you know, curated, or whether they're basically just going to be like, you have a game, it seems to function, here you go. I guess that'll be another one of those interesting things that we kind of see as time goes on. But shifting back to the game, I am in the process of redeploying my Air Force, so I have closed in on Warsaw, and in order to support my offensive in the direction of Warsaw, I need to go ahead and redeploy my units. So one of the things you can do in this game is you can actually strategically redeploy units and basically move them via rail, or I'm not sure how aircraft move, if they move via rail or whether they fly. I think they fly because they can cover pretty vast distances in such a short period of time. But again, the logistics behind that, you know, there are certainly ground elements that can't fly with a fighter unit that would have to be transported some other way. So and whenever you strategically redeploy, it gives you a little train icon, if you will, which seems to imply there's some sort of rail movement. I don't think, you know, I'm redeploying some infantry units. To me, it almost seems like there's not much of a point. Infantry units can usually march just about as far, assuming you're not in like a wooded or forested area. Ground forces seem like they can march just as far as they can be transported via rail, so I think maybe that's something that Wasteland needs to tweak a bit in here, because again, when you strategically redeploy, you can definitely, a vehicle unit can definitely move further than a rail unit. Now if you wanted to impose some kind of restriction where the first day that you move by rail you get a shorter transport distance, that would make sense to me, because you know, there's the whole delay of getting on board rail cars and then getting off rail cars, and kind of the, if you want to get into the actual detail of it, you know, just like a unit deploying, a combat unit deploying to line a battle out of column, you know, in the Napoleonics or Civil War took hours and hours for a large unit. So that's kind of similar, you know, all these men and equipment and different items getting on board a train and loading up, that would certainly take a while, especially for a larger unit like, you know, a regiment. But the fact that you can move so little via rail in a single day, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the geographics are behind the hexes. I haven't seen anything posted other than they've kept thousands of hexes. And I'm not saying you should be able to move from one side of the map to the other in a single day either. That's not where I'm coming from at all. But you should be able to move further than you can move via rail in a single day as a ground unit, especially if you move the last turn via rail as a ground unit. It just doesn't seem like there's much point to strategically redeploying if you're a ground unit. And if that's a feature you only want to include for air units, then disable it for ground units, because it just seems to be a little bit misleading to me. One other item worth talking about here as we move on to the is it Czechoslovakian? As we move on to the Czechoslovakian turn or whatnot, is the fact that while ground and air combat seems somewhat well done or somewhat understandable, commanding the limited selection of naval units is just a complete and utter confusion for me. There is not a good job done by the developer of explaining or demonstrating or making naval units useful in any manner, and that's something that I think the game needs to improve upon if they do intend to release further follow-on titles for other campaigns, especially if they're looking at some of the other early war campaigns where the Germans actually had a fleet that was actually capable of doing something. Norway probably being the best example. Some North African campaigns as well, even, you would need the ability to have fleet actions with regards to, the Italians on the side of the Germans. If you're looking at a campaign in this scale or this scope, which I don't think they intend to abandon unless they're going to totally revamp how the game works. So that's another thing that I think could definitely be improved upon, because I'd show you on screen here how naval units work, but I honestly have no clue. The interface for naval units, it's not a hex-based system. You don't point, you don't click. It's almost like they're just C zones where they just kind of sit, but then how you order them to bombard troops, how you order them to do anything or even move, there isn't a good grasp on it. It doesn't seem clear. So that's one other thing I just wanted to go ahead and bring up, because I think that's an area for improvement, and I think at the very least, if there is a good model there behind the scenes, the user interface needs to be improved substantially for it to be usable in any kind of user-friendly environment. But that's just my take. So Gdynia finally fell after quite an extensive engagement there, going on almost not quite a week, but maybe about 5 days or so of constant combat, bombardment, and me attempting to take the city. It finally fell, so the Danzig Gdynia area has been cleared. Now it's just down to some of the forts and islands kind of to the north, but that area is more or less all destroyed there, as you can see. As I've already mentioned, I'm closing in on Warsaw. The Polish army has really disintegrated before me to a large extent, and it's September 10th, so this is right around the time period where historically the Polish launched a large-scale counterattack in what was the largest battle of the German invasion of Poland, and never really caught the Germans off guard in the sense that they were really never terribly at risk. They were driven back somewhat. It was an offensive launched by some Polish troops, which you could say had been pocketed or somewhat ignored. I talked more about that in one of the earlier videos. But the point that I'm making here is the fact that in this game, the Polish have not fared as well as historically was the case. They may have slowed me down a bit on my march to Warsaw, so I don't have the city entirely invested yet or surrounded yet, whereas maybe by now historically the Germans did. But the difference to history and now is that at this time in history, the Polish had some 200,000 soldiers who were launching a counterattack into the flank of one of the German armies, which drew pressure off of Warsaw and delayed the assault on Warsaw. At this time, it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Again, I mentioned it before, it's somewhat because I've got Fog of War off, so I know where every Polish unit is. I'm not going to bypass them or miss them I probably should have played with Fog of War on, but I had already been like September 6th or 7th. I think I was 2-3 streams in before I really thought about it, and initially when I started the stream up, I didn't even check. I should have checked to make sure Fog of War was on, but it was not. So again, if you're looking at this game as something that you're interested in or possibly looking at checking out, then just bear that in mind, that Fog of War is on. You do have the ability to have it turned off and not see every single unit on the screen there, and I think they do an adequate job with regards to Fog of War and making you know, it not totally overbearing. I think sometimes some games maybe make Fog of War a little bit too impossible in the sense that they just assume units don't send any scouts out at all and you just get ambushed left and right, which that isn't very accurate either. But again, I digress. At this point, I'm just kind of feel like I'm sort of rambling at this point. This is episode 4 in the AAR, so there are 3 previous episodes to go ahead and check out. If that's something that interests you, I'll throw those links in the description, and we can take a look at that. You can take a look at that there. Goodness, I've never done a Let's Play quite this long in terms of length of play, where there weren't maybe new, fresh things to take a look at. So, if I'm running around in circles for that, I do apologize. I'm still working on kind of reducing some of the pocketed Polish troops to the west. There are quite a few of them, while at the same time marching on Warsaw and kind of getting some troops from the north to kind of come down south now that Danzig pocket has been largely reduced. You can see there's a lot of open ground where Polish troops just don't exist. The Polish army is more or less melting away. Again, a little bit ahistorically, a little bit early compared to what actually happened. Just trying to, you saw me hitting the back button there a bit. Sometimes you're not always sure which territory your unit is going to conquer, and one thing that you do need to keep in mind as you advance is these railways you can see on here do provide lines of supply, although supply is fairly abstract in this game. Despite having supply depots, I'd like to see maybe a little bit more in-depth supply system implemented into the game. But one way you supply your troops in this abstract manner is using rail lines, and as you advance through enemy territory, you can only take over 1 rail line per move. Like if you move through a hex, your units will only take over 1 rail line per turn, and it's kind of, or per move, so you have to individually sometimes select you want to move over the rail line, or the computer will not do what you necessarily want it to do because it uses less movement points to move elsewhere because it has to convert the rail gauge. Yeah, that's something that could probably be worked on, but again, just something where that's why you kind of sometimes see me clicking back, and then you get that little digging symbol on the screen there indicates that your troops have basically converted that rail from maybe whatever gauge the Polish used to what the Germans use. You can see here me trying to figure out naval combat. Again, I mentioned it earlier, trying to get my fleet to engage the Polish fleet. I have no idea how this works. I don't know if I'm just being maybe a little bit thick and not quite grasping how to tell naval units to move, but I don't know. It seems like naval units are purely abstract in the sense that they simulate combat with convoys, they simulate blockades, but you never really, there's nothing active it seems you can do with them, which again, the Polish campaign was, naval units were not terribly important. Several Polish destroyers fled early in the war to England. The German fleet obviously did some operations against the Polish, mainly a bombardment of a single pocket battleship from the pre-World War II days that dated back toward before World War I, of some Polish forts. It wasn't critical, but in a game with regimental-sized combat, and with those Polish units represented on the map, you should be able to somehow, recreate those bombardments, those attacks on those forts. I can't figure out how to do it. Again, maybe it's just me not being fully understanding of everything in this game. This is one of the more extended playthroughs I have done. I have not played through the entire campaign previously, so again, it might be my fault. It certainly is possible, but there seems to be a need for a better job of, at least through the user interface, explaining how to use naval units. Not necessarily a walkthrough or a tutorial, which would be nice, but just the interface seeming to make sense. Because as much as I enjoy this game, the naval interface to me is a little bit difficult to wrap my head around. I don't understand it at all. But again, here I am. I'm still whittling away at some Polish pockets here to the west. Maybe have way more troops committed to it than I need. At the same time, I don't want to overextend myself and get myself into a situation where troops that raced east now have to race back west. I've got things pretty well in hand. I think it'd be interesting to play the game from the Polish side. The developers kind of admitted that the game is not designed to let you win as the Polish armed forces. It's more along the lines of, let's see how long you can resist. And in that sense, it kind of goes to a lot of the mindset that a lot of games have these days, where it may not be about winning, but it's about surviving as long as you can. That's certainly a trait which is very common in the shooter genre these days, with like zombie games and other things like that. But it's not usually a trait that's adopted by game developers of war games or strategy games. It's a nice twist, though. I think that could be something that, if people are willing to embrace that, just see how well you can do, just see how well you can survive, from maybe a cerebral game more like this than a shooter like Left 4 Dead or something. It'd be kind of interesting to me to see more games like that, because there are definitely combat based scenarios, conflicts where in the past, you wouldn't think it would be fun to play as a side that is, I don't want to say guaranteed to lose, because obviously anything can happen in a military engagement, but if you're playing as the Japanese in World War II, for example, against the Americans in the Pacific, outside of the first couple months of the war, once American industry gets going and American equipment becomes just vast, the feasibility and realism of being able to completely destroy the American military to the extent that you can win is not, it's not impossible, I wouldn't say, but I would certainly say it's not very likely. The odds are heavily stacked against you. And if more games kind of adopt that standpoint, you could see more historically accurate simulations in games come out, rather than games designed primarily for gameplay. Which I think a lot of war games do. Obviously, that's the point, is to simulate a realistic conflict. But maybe there are other conflicts which you'd see covered, which presently aren't. The Russo-German War, not the Russo-German, the Franco-German or Franco-Prussian War. Goodness, wow. The Franco-Prussian War is a good example. Maybe that would be something that would get a little bit more coverage. The French military was certainly a mess, and in an accurate simulation, the Germans had a huge advantage in everything outside numbers. So maybe that would be a good example, or maybe there'd be more coverage of the Mexican-American War. Accurate simulations that look at detail of these conflicts in a very realistic sense. The odds are heavily stacked on one side or another. Again, I don't like to say any war was a foregone conclusion, because I don't typically subscribe to that belief, but there are certainly conflicts where the odds are so heavily in one side's favor than another, barring some genius general coming out, it makes it harder to simulate that game in a way that people would find interesting and want to play. I guess that's where I'm coming from. But anyway, still September 10th, still moving my troops around. Probably going to cut this video a little bit short, as I said, over what I've done previously, just because, at this stage, I don't really have the Siege of Warsaw going. I'm getting closer. I don't have anything terribly compelling to talk about in this particular part of the conflict. Just another video in the, AAR series, if you will, for this game, and I'm just really just repositioning my troops and getting things in place. So I wanted to kind of do this AAR where I played through and you could see kind of every minute of the game as I played through it. And now you can see my example of rail units really, of strategic redeployments really not having all that much value. I mean, what, I moved 3 hexes there? I can march 3 hexes. What's the point? But anyway, so, just kind of getting things in place. I wanted to do an AAR where I showed everything from this game and showed, not everything from the game, but everything from my experience playing the game. And I didn't want to do really any editing of it to kind of make you lose the feel of what it's like, because there is some downtime again as you redeploy forces, and that's what I'm doing right now. Is I'm redeploying, I'm reinforcing some troops, and other than that, not a whole lot going on. Just kind of getting troops in place. So that's where I'm going to go ahead and cut this this video off. I'll go ahead and end part 4. Looks like this is going to be about probably about a 6-part. Well, it's a little bit early to assume that, but I would imagine it'll probably be broken out into 6, maybe 7 parts. So we're past the halfway point in this video AAR, and I appreciate you sticking with me. I appreciate you watching. I definitely am enjoying it, and I hope you're enjoying the gameplay as well. Thanks again to thewargamer.com for having me do this, and if you do enjoy this and you haven't seen the previous videos, the links to the previous videos are in the description, so check that out. And until probably next week is when the next video will come out. So until next week, this is the Historical Gamer for thewargamer.com, signing out and saying thanks for watching.